Good evening, everybody. Everybody. If you'd like to move into the middle or like turn your chairs, we're going to get started here in a few minutes. How about we start with a round of applause for the delicious food we had today? And thank you to Trudy and her team for making that available for us. I'd like to welcome you to an evening of solutions for a new Alberta, brought to you by the Alberta Prosperity Project. We're a group of grassroots Albertans with no politicians at our table, committed to inspiring, advocating, and educating all Albertans on the merits of freedom and prosperity through independence. The Alberta Prosperity Project came from humble beginnings. It started on the 23rd of May of 2021 in an oil field shop in Nisku, Alberta. A group of like-minded Albertans who had had enough of the ineffectiveness of our provincial government and the overreach from Ottawa decided it was time to take action, and thus the Alberta Prosperity Project was born, and here we are. At this time, I would like to invite Tanner Hnidey to open our event with a prayer.
I say before each event, we pray before each event because we recognize the supremacy of God, and we believe that prayer is a recognition of that. So if you'd like to bow your heads with me, we'll offer a short word. Lord, I thank you so much for this day that you've given us today. And I thank you for each and every individual that's able to meet here and gather and learn about the benefits of a free and prosperous Alberta. We see what's happening in the news and even what's happening in America, and we realize that this is so much larger than Alberta. In this, we ask that you would guide us and that you would show us exactly what to do that we might win freedom and independence and protect the rights of man. Be with us tonight. Might we learn something and have a lot of fun together. In your name, amen.
Thank you, Tanner. My name's Shannon Packham, and I'm from Patricia, Alberta. I'm going to be your MC this evening, and it's my goal to keep all of you in line and to help things move smoothly along. I was a teacher, but I have not been inside a classroom since February 2020. And it was at that time that I found out, or I realized, that if you don't stand up for what is right, then you also have to understand that you're part of what is wrong. And it's time that we all dig deep and make things right. Here's an interesting quote from a young man. As a 16-year-old, Eli Wiesel endured and survived the ravages of World War II. His experiences caused him to note the following: one man of integrity can make a difference. Integrity is the character trait. Turn that off. Integrity is the character trait of having honesty, strong moral principles, and moral uprightness. The Alberta Prosperity Project holds this trait as essential, and our speakers today will help you understand how this characteristic will be key in helping Alberta achieve the greatness we know we are capable of. We do believe that there's a better future for all of us, and it's just around the corner. It starts right here in this room today. We're planting the seeds of change and the seeds of hope today. Our solutions for a new Alberta we hope that our solutions for a new Alberta will help to plant those seeds. So this is how things go. We have presentations. We've got some time set aside for questions and answers. We use these index cards, and I ask that you write your question on an index card. Just makes things go faster. I'll read the questions, and then the guests will answer those questions. So I also ask that you write in your very best penmanship, like there would be a prize for a winner. I'd like to just point out the exits. The back door is, well, there's usually exit signs. Oh, there's one right there. There's probably one over here. Just get out of the building, okay? Just leave. Take a friend, get out. We do count on donations when when we're at events like this, we count on donations to cover our costs of the facility and etc. And we are thankful for anything that you can give. There's a petition at the back table. If you, one of the guests will explain that to you. We need a lot of signatures. We've already thanked the volunteers for the dinner. I'd like to also thank Morley and his team for putting this event together. And Ken and Sharon White, these two individuals right up here in the front row, this is their 8th event. They're part of the team. So let's have a round of applause for them as well. I must apologize that we don't have any merchandise with us today. There was a miscommunication between the merchandiser and the service who is going to deliver it, so we don't have it, and I do apologize for that. I'd also like to point out that Dr. Wagner's books are available at the back. No Other Option, Self-Determination for Alberta, and Alberta Separatism, Then and Now. They're $15. And Gary and Lorene Hansen are from Sherwood Park. They travel to a lot of our shows to sell those books. And I recommend them. They're a great read. All right, have you heard enough of me now? You want me to get started? Who said yes? Our first guest is a resident of Edmonton, educated over 17 years at the universities of Alberta, McGill, and Stanford. He is a recently retired heart and lung surgeon and critical care specialist. He is known as North American pioneer of heart and lung transplants, implementing the first heart and lung transplantation program in Western Canada in 1985 and the first heart combined transplant, performing the first heart transplant in 1985 and the first heart combined with both lungs in 1986. The success of his programs grew to be the largest and most successful in Canada and one of the largest programs in North America. He has been recognized with numerous awards for excellence in medicine as well as in community service. He is a key driver of the Alberta Prosperity Project as our CEO. And on top of all that, he is an individual who has had tremendous political influence in the eras of Premiers Getty, Klein, and Stelmach. Here to present to you today, Alberta's prosperity and freedom through independence, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Dennis Modry.
Thank you, Shannon. And thank you, everybody, for attending this evening. How many people here have been at a previous Alberta Prosperity Project event? Okay, and how many have not been? I know it's the rest, but I just wanted to get a sense of hands. Great, wonderful. Let's start a little different today. For one thing, I am absolutely delighted to be in this beautiful town of Wainwright. And the reason partly is because my grandparents, when they moved to Canada from the Ukraine, wound up right here. That's where it started. Yeah. So I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for them being here at that time. Well, of course, they had kids, and that made something else happen. But anyhow, here we are. So I'm gonna, like I said, I'm gonna start off a little bit different today. I want to explain something in case, particularly for those people who are members of the Alberta Prosperity Project, but it's relevant for everybody. One of the things that we need to do is we need to massively grow our membership. We've been working on this project for nearly 2 years in terms of the intellectual property, but we didn't start until February. And so here we are right now. We have set up 140 educational chapters throughout the province. We have over 1,000 volunteers, a very terrific management team, and we have over 1 million social hits, over 5 million engagements on social media, and we have as well somewhere in the order of 8,400 to 8,500 members, 8,400, 8,500 members now. So what we need to do is we need to grow the membership massively to 500,000 to 1 million or more. And I'll explain why a little later. But as a result of that, about 2.5 months ago or so, we conceived of the idea, how do we get engagement? How do we get eyeballs to look at what the Alberta Prosperity Project is about? So we made a decision at the board level and with senior management that we were going to do something that might seem to some people an anathema in terms of the direction that we're heading, but actually it was a strategic plan. And that was the first thing I want to talk about, is we decided to have host a UCP leadership forum. And the reason for that was because we wanted to increase our profile to the point where we get the attention of the majority of Albertans. And that's one thing that will do it. But the second thing is, we're an educational society, right? And if I pose a question to somebody because I don't have the answer, and they respond with an answer, they've educated me. Now, there are many things with respect to the UCP that many of us are very unsatisfied with. So this forum is going to be moderated by Rebel News, Ezra Levent, and myself. And we formulated the questions. And they're tough questions. They're tough, but they're fair questions. And they're the kind of questions that need to be answered because you want to know what those answers are. We don't advocate for any party. We're not advocating for the UCP. We're creating a movement that any party can get in front of. So that's one thing. And if any of you have any, although we formulated a bunch of questions and they're being vetted right now before I send them to Ezra, if anybody's got any really good questions that they think they want answered, send them to us and we'll consider if they can be incorporated into what it is we're doing. So this will be an educational process as well. The second thing that we decided to do a month ago at our board meeting was we were needing to be responsive to what many people at our events have asked us. And they've asked us, what are you doing to work with other freedom groups and other independence organizations that want freedom and prosperity for Alberta as well? And at that point, we weren't really doing anything. We had some discussions with the Free Alberta Strategy, and I'd had some discussions with Alberta Institute, but we weren't really doing anything. So the question was, could we engage with some of these other organizations and see if there's synergy with them? In other words, we don't necessarily need to agree with everything that they're doing, but is there a way in which what they're doing can facilitate the growth of the Alberta Prosperity Project? And so we agreed, and with senior management, we decided that we would roll this out. So there's, I don't know, 20 or 25 different groups that we've considered synergizing with. It doesn't mean we're partnering with them or anything like that. We're just determining whether or not we can use their vehicle to help us grow the membership. So proof of concept, last evening, I happened to be in Bonnyville with Take Back Alberta. And that is an organization that's trying to basically restructure the corruption within the UCP. So for whatever reason, that's not our goal, that's not our objective, that's not what we're all about. But I was asked to speak, and I did. And the outcome of that, there were about 450 to 500 people there. About a third of the audience were already Alberta Prosperity members. But the outcome of that was there were over 100 people that signed up new memberships to the Alberta Prosperity Project, and there were a large number of petitions that were signed. So proof of concept, the idea of trying to synergize with some other organizations worked, at least last night. We also had a webinar a week or so ago with Alberta 51. That webinar I thought went pretty well, but it didn't seem feasible for us to be able to synergize with their efforts because they want absolutely simply for Alberta to become the 51st state. But I just wanted to give you that information to put into context what we are constantly thinking about in trying to grow the membership and to get in front of as many Albertans as we can. So with that, let's start. How many people here are pleased with the performance of our federal government? Not a show of hands? All right. Well, you know, in January of this year, January 4th, an Angus Reid survey indicated that 93% of Albertans were disillusioned, that was the term, disillusioned with the federal government, and for all the reasons that you folks know. And one of the things that happens, although we're an educational society, but one of the things that happens to a society is you become apathetic and you decide not to vote. And you might be surprised that only 1.8% of the population in Canada is a member of any party that votes. It's very small. It's a very small number of people that control what happens to all of you. So keep that in mind when we talk about what we need to do to actually put you folks in charge of your destiny rather than a small group of politicians that are selected by an even smaller group of people. So the Alberta Prosperity Project, of course, is designed to educate and unite all Albertans, businesses, and organizations to protect their interests, your individual freedoms, rights, and prosperity, and self-determination by enabling Alberta to chart a new path forward. A new path forward that will absolutely constitutionally protect those individual freedoms and rights. So how are we going to go about doing this? First of all, we're really truly facing an existential threat to our very way of life, to our economic well-being, and to our individual freedoms and rights. It is coming at us like a freight train, the restriction of all of these things, if we do nothing. But I can tell you this, if we come together for common cause and do something amazing, something that's never been done before, we can win this. We are in an ideological war, literally for our very soul. So there are three options that are facing us, folks. The first option is the do nothing option. And the second option is trying to find independence within Canada or independence untethered to Canada. And I'll deal with those two in a minute. But here's the do nothing option. The do nothing option is really a reflection of what's happening to us now. It's already started. And you've probably heard about the Great Reset. That's the euphemistic name for the movement by highly influential people of the World Economic Forum and the United Nations under a contract called Agenda 2030 to reset the global economy and to restructure the very fabric and function of society using banks, governance agencies, and environmental, social, and governance metrics to control billions of people. And here's the way it will work. And it's already started. So everybody will get a digital ID. And we already have a digital ID in this province, which is useful to access your healthcare records. It's useful to register your vehicle with the Alberta Motor Association. But apart from things like that, it's not useful because it will be used to track you everywhere you go. And if you're okay with that, if you're okay with that kind of surveillance, then I have no words for that. Now, the second part of the Great Reset happens to be the issue of a programmable digital currency. And this is being discussed now, and it's being trialed in some areas. Now, if any of you donated money during the convoy, the trucker convoy, and by the way, love those guys. They did a great job for advancing the cause of freedom. I have enormous respect for all of them. Now, having said that, the issue of this programmable digital currency, remember what happened when what Trudeau did. He froze the accounts of any of you and many people who made contributions. With a programmable digital currency, it's even easier because you don't need to tell the bank to freeze the account. You can just do it from the central administration of the federal government. I don't think this is the kind of control that we want. But if you think that's bad, think about this. You'll be issued an environmental, a social, and a governance credit score, an ESG credit score, or a social credit score. You'll be given that credit score, which will then determine the permissions that you get in order to purchase and travel. So you can envision that if your ESG score isn't good enough, you may not be able to purchase anything. Your account may be frozen, or you may go to the grocery store and say you want to buy a couple of beef tenderloins, and when you go to pay, you find out your credit card has been programmed so that you cannot buy more than 2 beef tenderloins every 4 months, as an example. This is the kind of control that's possible. I'm not saying that will happen, but this is the kind of control that is possible. And when you realize that the federal government wants to eliminate, or at least dramatically diminish the livestock industry around the world, you can see that this is a real potential to happen. And if you want to travel, well, you may be restricted in terms of if you can travel, how far you can travel, by what means you can travel. And by the way, right now you are being controlled in how far you can travel, just by the price of gas. So think about that. And we still haven't lifted those darn travel restrictions yet, leaving and coming back into Canada, particularly coming back, having to use that, what is that program that you have to fill out? ArriveCan. Yeah, I did that, and I must say it was more than a pain. Questions later, yeah. So this gentleman will need a card. So what you can envision with this dystopian Orwellian future is that you will be pinned, cataloged, categorized, tracked, and controlled in everything that you do. It's so hard to believe that this is happening, but it is happening. And this is why there are people that are rising up in various areas. How many people here are pleased with the whole concept of restricting the use of fertilizer? I don't think so. And getting into our hydrocarbon industry, that's a whole other issue with their intent to reduce our hydrocarbon industry by 42%, output by 42% by 2030, and ending it by 2050. How unrealistic this is just beyond description. The whole issue of climate change, in my opinion, I'm a scientist. Yes, I was a cardiac surgeon, and yes, I directed the cardiac ICU, but one of the things, one capability that I did have was to be able to look at scientific articles. And when you look at a scientific article, in order to determine validity, you look at the methodology first. And if the methodology is invalid or incomplete, then the results may well be invalid, or by luck, could be valid. So I looked at a lot of the science in terms of climate change, and some of the obvious things that you folks know is that CO2 makes plants grow, right? You also know that you put CO2 in greenhouses to facilitate plant growth. You might be interested to know that we have 420 parts per million in the atmosphere to 500 right now, but a few thousand years ago, it happened to be 15, 20, 30,000 parts per million. Guess what? Plants were growing. The planet was green. So one of the things that is really important to understand is, how did this all start? Because everything that's happening to us right now relates to the climate change argument. And it was started by Maurice Strong out of Winnipeg, a billionaire oil man who went to the United Nations. And while in the United Nations, he conceived of the idea of using climate change as a means to redistribute wealth. And hence the concept of carbon credits. Now, speaking of carbon credits, Alberta produces 275.8 million metric tons of CO2 a year. But you know what's not taken into account? Is our carbon sink. What is not taken into account is how much CO2 is taken up by our boreal forests, grasslands, agricultural lands, swamps, muskeg, etc. And some of the preliminary analysis would suggest that we're actually carbon negative. So if we're carbon negative, for the eco-alarmists out there, for the eco-zealots, when we can prove that we're actually significantly carbon negative, to get to net zero, we would have to sell carbon credits for billions of dollars. What do you think of that idea? Can you see the eco-alarmist brains just exploding? They would, for sure. So the whole issue of the World Economic Forum UN Agenda 2030, using climate change to implement these draconian policies, such as, for example, Klaus Schwab says they will own nothing and be happy. More recently, the federal justice minister has said that people don't have the right to own property. And more recently, Klaus Schwab has said people should not own personal vehicles. This is the kind of thing that's coming out of this World Economic UN Agenda 2030. One of the things that I found most appalling about it was this statement seen in a video of a World Economic Forum meeting, where the person said, "We need to eliminate billions of people. They will find peace in the grave." Now, for someone like me who's been a cardiac surgeon, my career was to keep people alive and improve their quality of life as well as their longevity. I found that particularly upsetting. It made me angry. So here we are. This is the do nothing option, folks. And if it scares you, it should. It should scare you. The metaphor that I use to describe where we are right now is like, consider Alberta a canoe on the Niagara River. Some of you heard me use this before. And you're the inhabitants. All of Albertans are the inhabitants. And you know which way that canoe is going. But if we all pull together in the same direction, we can get to shore before we hit the falls and go over into the abyss of the Great Reset. And there's nothing great about it. So what are our options then? The other two options are, can we fix our circumstances within Confederation, or do we need to chart a new path forward as an independent nation? How many people here would like Alberta to remain in Confederation, but with control of our wealth and control of our affairs? Okay. How many people here think that it's, well, I'm going to word it differently. I'm going to tell you how difficult it is to fix our circumstances in Confederation. And we're going to look at this through the lens of history briefly, the structural electoral imbalance in Canada, and the constitutional hurdles. And we're going to consider ending equalization. How many people here would like to end equalization? Okay, great. How many people think it's possible? There's a couple of hands up there. Okay. All right. So let's consider ending equalization as a metaphor for ending a lot of things that harm us, such as Bill C-69, the pipeline ban, Bill C-48, the tanker ban, the carbon tax, the Canada Health Act, which restricts creative solutions to healthcare. Those are just but a few of the sorts of things that are problematic for us. But we'll use ending equalization as a metaphor for all of these things that compromise us. So, let's look at history first. As you know, Alberta was incorporated into Canada September 1, 1905, thanks to the efforts of a fellow by the name of Sir Clifford Sifton, who was the Minister of the Interior in the Liberal government of Sir Wilfrid Laurier. And what he said in 1904 is very prescient. It's important to understand what he said at that time, because then you'll understand why we are where we are at now. So what he said in 1904 was, we desire, and all Canadian patriots desire, and Canadian patriots in 1904 were just the people that lived in Quebec and Ontario. So we desire, and all Canadian patriots desire, that the great trade of the prairies shall go to enrich our people in the East, to build up our factories and our places of work, and in every legitimate way contribute to our prosperity. Now, the great trade of the prairies is Alberta's wealth. We've been a colony since we were incorporated into Canada for 116 years. We have served the interests of the East to the extent that since 1965, we've contributed nearly $700 billion to Confederation, to virtue signaling causes that don't align with many of the things that we believe in Alberta, and to buy votes to stay in power in the East. Nearly $700 billion, we haven't had 1 cent back of that. In the 70s, and this is important to understand as well, and this will put it in sharp focus for you, the difficulty that we're facing. The power differential between Ottawa and Alberta. In the 70s, Alberta was booming. There was liquid gold in the streets, oil. People and businesses were migrating in droves to Alberta from elsewhere in Canada and elsewhere in the world. Alberta was becoming the center of economic power in Canada. All 5 major banks were moving their head offices to Calgary, and one did, CIBC. But this movement collided with what was going on in Quebec with the Quebec secessionist movement. And as a result of that collision, Pierre Elliott Trudeau and his finance minister, Marc Lalonde, and the financial elites in Ottawa, Montreal, and Toronto, who were terrified about this loss of the East, of the loss of the East being the center of economic power, came up with the plan that you all know was the National Energy Policy. It was sold to Canadians as a means of redistributing wealth from wealthy Alberta to poorer regions in the country so they would have comparable social programs. That wasn't the real truth. That was probably less than 5% of the truth. The real truth is 2 points. Number one, to prevent Alberta from ever again becoming the center of economic power in Canada. And number two, to buy Quebec's loyalty to Canada with Alberta's wealth, which is why they get 2 of every $3 of equalization. And here we are now, 116 years later, and not one federal government or provincial government has ever protected our interests, our wealth, our freedoms, our rights, our prosperity, our self-determination. That is what has happened to us in 116 years. When will we ever learn? Now, If you still think we can end equalization when you understand history, let's look at the electoral imbalance. The electoral imbalance that we have in Canada is that we don't have representation by population, but realistically it wouldn't matter. But in any event, for example, Prince Edward Island gets to elect 1 MP for every 40,000 population, Alberta 1 for every 130,000 population. How's that fair? Similarly, the Senate. Alberta and BC have 25% of the population, 11% of the Senate seats. So legislation that is passed is always favoring the East and not the West. But more important, there are two key points to understand about this electoral imbalance. Every federal election will be decided by voter-rich Quebec and Ontario, number one. And it doesn't matter the party that wants to be the federal government, and it doesn't matter what party is the federal government, because they will always pander to the wishes of Quebec and Ontario to get those votes at Alberta's expense. This is what is called the tyranny of the majority over the minority. And it's the failure of democracy. And the way you save democracy is you look after individual rights before you look after societal rights. Because if you look after individual rights, you'll look after societal rights. The reverse does not occur. The reverse leads to socialism, Marxism, and communism. And that is the glide path we're on right now. So that's the electoral imbalance that we have. So if you still think we can end equalization, and you know history and you know the electoral imbalance, let's look at the constitutional hurdles. There are 5. So because here's where the rubber meets the road. If we really want to fix Alberta's circumstances in Confederation, then it's necessary to open and change multiple sections of the Constitution. And here's what it takes. It takes a majority vote in the House of Commons to open and change the Constitution. It takes a majority vote in the Senate to do the same thing. It takes 7 of 10 provincial legislatures representing 50% of the population also voting in favor, in this case, of ending equalization. How do you think Quebec would vote? They get 2 of every $3, right? So they're not going to vote in favor. But you see the difficulty just with those 3 issues of opening and changing the Constitution. Then the 4th issue is Quebec itself. Quebec believes that it has a veto, and it never even signed the 1982 Constitution Act. And they demonstrated that they did not too long ago, a couple of months ago, when they passed into law through their legislature Bill 96. And Bill 96 overrode the Canadian Constitution by abridging minority language rights. And the federal government's not going to fight it. So you see, de facto, they have a veto. And then the 5th hurdle is the Supreme Court itself. When there's going to be a constitutional battle, it will be adjudicated by the Supreme Court. And you can be sure that there would be major battles that would have to be adjudicated by the Supreme Court, which means when the Supreme Court adjudicates something like issues of constitutional change, they don't take days, weeks, months to resolve. They take years and sometimes decades to resolve. How much time do we have before 2030? Not much. More than that, look at the structure of the Supreme Court. All 9 justices are appointed from the Prime Minister's office. 3 are from Quebec, 3 are from Ontario, 1 is from the Maritimes, and 2 are from all of Western Canada. So how do you think the Supreme Court would vote in favor of changing the Constitution to benefit Alberta, or to keep it as is, or change it to benefit the East? It's pretty obvious. And if you want some relatively recent evidence, in Alberta, the Court of Appeal ruled that the carbon tax was unconstitutional. The federal government challenged that, and the Supreme Court ruled it was constitutional. So here we have a carbon tax. Once again, just to prove the point. The federal government, if, for example, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Alberta doesn't enforce the fertilizer reduction, they will withhold transfer payments. That's how they force compliance. But here's one other thing. To change the Constitution, or two attempts have been made to change the Constitution. One was the Meech Lake Accord, the other was the Charlottetown Accord. They both failed. So here we have a history of impossibility, if you will, to change the Constitution because of the electoral imbalance, constitutional hurdles, and history. So fixing our circumstances in Confederation is extremely difficult, if not impossible. However, what about Alberta charting a new path forward as an independent nation? At the moment, that's a challenge as well. But for the audience, for those people who want Alberta to remain in Confederation, and for those people who want Alberta to become a new separate nation, here's where you can come together. You can come together with the concept of leverage. Because remember I said earlier, there's a power imbalance between Ottawa and Alberta. They have all the power, we have none. That is why this referendum that we had on equalization, that Jason Kenney knew it would go nowhere because we have no leverage to end equalization. He knew that. That's why nothing happened after it. So the only leverage that permits negotiating with Ottawa on a level playing field where Alberta now has serious negotiating power is if you give that power to the provincial government through a referendum on independence. Because that referendum on independence forces negotiations. And if the negotiations go well, then, for example, those people who want Alberta to remain in Confederation, but with a far better deal, that could happen. But the odds of that happening are extremely, extremely difficult to imagine. But it's not totally impossible. But if the negotiations don't go well, then the corollary is that Alberta can declare its independence because those negotiations are actually exit negotiations. Negotiations on what will happen, for example, with the debt, what will happen with Crown lands, what will happen with military bases, things like that. Now, how would it work? Well, for example, let's say an independence-focused government is elected in 2023. And that government then takes control of that which it can within the Constitution: policing, pensions, immigration, employment insurance, and provincial tax collection, which sets the stage for taking control of federal tax collection. He who has the gold rules, right? Now, you take control of those things, and that can be done within 18 to 24 months of the 2023 election. But at the same time, you're negotiating with the federal government because you want control of federal tax collection. You also want control and an end to Bill C-69, Bill C-48. You want an end to the carbon tax. Fly wants to participate in the communication, and but any case. Similarly, the Canada Health Act, negotiating ending that. You might be interested to know that in November 2nd of 2021, a very well-crafted report looking at healthcare systems around the world determined that the Canadian healthcare system functions in the lowest quartile of quality at the highest quartile of cost. So for those of you who have had problems with the Alberta healthcare, this is part of what we're facing when we just ideologically consider that the Canada Health Act has to be retained in its current form. So, getting back to the point of what happens in the first 18 to 24 months. Like I said, you take control of the 5 things that you can take control of. You're trying to negotiate on those other things, and the public will see a demonstration of the intransigence of the federal government to deal fairly with Alberta. How many people here are pensioners? How many people here are, okay, you're pensioners. How would you like $3 billion a year added to your pension? Right? Do you know that we overfund the pension plan by $3 billion a year? That would all come back to you with proper negotiations or if we were independent. Now, the other thing is, how many people are working and drawing an income and paying taxes? There must be something on me. So how would you like a flat 8 to 10% tax rate? Would you like that? Well, we're sending right now $55 to $60 billion in federal taxes to Ottawa, of which we get back 27. Can you imagine what we can do with all of that wealth? Let's take property ownership. How many people own their home and don't have a mortgage? Okay, if you think you own your home, just don't pay your property taxes and you'll find out who owns your home. And that's the point that I'm saying. We don't even have property rights. What I'm saying is by the retention of the wealth that we create in this province, that it belongs to you people. It doesn't belong to Ottawa, it belongs to you people. Your lives, your quality of life can be dramatically improved in so many ways. Now, when we think about what I've just said and what will happen in 2 years, what can happen in 2 years from the 2023 election, that's around the time of having a referendum on independence. And when successful, the Alberta government can then go to Ottawa, negotiate from a position of strength. If it gets what it wants, then Alberta remains in Confederation. If it doesn't, Alberta has every moral and legal legitimacy to chart a new path forward as an independent sovereign nation. And it's important for you to understand that those who want Alberta to stay in Confederation with a better deal can be friends with those people who want Alberta to leave. Because you both want the same thing. You want freedom and prosperity. And you can have it one of those 2 ways. But you have to give the government, an independence-focused government, that opportunity through a referendum on independence. And so what the Alberta Prosperity Project is doing is just like now, we're conducting events like this all over the province. I don't know how many we've had, Shannon, but 80 or 90 events of some type, town halls, podcasts, webinars, media interviews. I mean, it's just going on and on and on. But the purpose is education. That's what we want to do, is we want to educate people. And it's like I said, how do we do that? How do we engage people? How do we grow this to 500,000 or 1 million people? And why those numbers? Why is that relevant? Why does it have to be so many? Well, it's basically based on what some of you already know as the 3.5% rule. That term was coined by Erica Chenoweth, a Harvard professor. And she studied societal movements for a couple of 100 years. And she determined that just 3.5% of a population can change the direction of a society. Think about that. When Jason Kenney and the UCP were elected, they had 120,000 members. That's 3.5% of the population. But there's a multiplier effect. Members influence people who are not members, and then they vote the same. But we don't want to take a chance. We want to grow the membership to 500,000 or 1 million people who absolutely desire, want, and are willing to stand up for freedom and prosperity. And with those kinds of numbers, we will achieve what Ralph Klein used to say many times: find a parade, find a movement, and get in front of it. And any party that wants to be elected will get in front of our movement. I can assure you that. We've talked to many, many different political candidates of every party. So what we're doing is not just having these events, but we've contracted with Rebel News. For those of you who see Rebel, you may see a lot of advertisements in relation. Similarly with Western Standard, we just signed the contract with them, and that'll be starting like now. Paid social media, which moves us up on the viewing, if you will, the viewing scale, viewing priority. As well, Touch Broadcasting Canada is coming, and digital billboard advertising. But this is the ideological fight of our life. It's literally a war. And we're up against very strong forces. But we're not alone. And we're really not alone when we're united as a region. Alberta is unique. It has a work ethic, a can-do attitude, an entrepreneurial spirit second to none. And what we're doing in Alberta will influence what happens in other regions in Canada and other regions in the world. It already is. We have members in the Alberta Prosperity Project across the country. Isn't that interesting? Saskatchewan's setting up their own Saskatchewan Prosperity Project. So we're doing what we can, but we really need you folks as well to be part of this journey. So I would encourage you to really seriously consider getting a membership. And if you got more time, get involved as a volunteer. We have over 1,000 volunteers, but we probably need 20,000. Our intention is to amplify what we're doing tenfold over the next 2 to 3 months. So remember, folks, freedom's not free. You're never going to have prosperity without freedom. And there is an enormous sense of urgency right now, given the UN WEF agenda. So with that, thank you very much for your attention, and sorry to spend so much time.
Dr. Dennis Modry. Oh, Dennis, your glasses. Dennis, you forgot your glasses. I see a couple of the volunteers walking about with the index cards. If you have any questions from Dennis's presentation, please raise your hand and someone will bring one by. Our next presenter is from Lloydminster, Alberta. We actually have 2 presenters from Lloydminster today. He is a brilliant industrial organization economist and published author. He is a speaker and commentator on political and ethical issues and has studied under some of Canada's foremost economists. With his keen interest, wit, and bright mind, he offers so much perspective to the Alberta Prosperity Project. And he's here to demonstrate the many merits and benefits of a free and prosperous Alberta. He is the co-host of weekly podcasts in his efforts to spread the Alberta Prosperity Project message. I think they're on podcast 12. Correct me if I'm wrong. But they are very good. They're on our Facebook page. Their podcasts have reached well over 20,000 viewers. He is our acting VP of Economics, as well as co-leader of our youth chapter. He cares deeply about the state that Alberta finds herself in and about how intrusively our governments meddle in our economy in order to facilitate our ruin. Here with an economic forecast for the independent nation of Alberta is Mr. Tanner Hnidey.
I'm a little taller. Well, thank you all so much for joining us this evening to discuss the benefits and merits of independence. And tonight, because we're in Wainwright, And because I used to haul grain to the feedlot in Czar, which, oh no, excuse me. Well, I did haul to the feedlot in Czar, but I also hauled, and it was my least favorite place to haul to, the pigs in Irma. The smell of the, oh, the flies. It was just the worst. You'd haul barley there, and well, you know, and I know. So I figured I'd talk about trucking tonight, grain trucking, and the economics of grain trucking, because the health of a nation is accurately predicted based on the health of its trucking and transport industry. As you know, our nation's health was revived, and our spirits, as Dr. Modry mentioned, were rejuvenated when those truckers protested in Ottawa and did more for our freedom and our rights and our prosperity than our government and our politicians and our bureaucracy has ever done in the whole of their existence. Now, you know and I know that if transport stalls, the nation stalls. And if the truckers are stalled for very much longer, then the nation begins to starve. And so, at the one end of our trucking industry, pulling lowboys and super Bs and flatbeds and cattle haulers or any other trailer or load that you can think of, there are those humble and often underappreciated men and women working their hardest, driving mile after mile, alert and never hypnotized by the rhythm of white lines that passes them on the wide horizon that is ever before them, delivering freight and commodity across not only our towns, not only our cities, not only our province as a whole, but the entire country and continent. At the other end of our trucking industry, at the bureaucratic end of our trucking industry, we endure those radical and often very ruthless men and women working their hardest, hardly working at all, delaying and denying, always passing the problem to another committee, another hearing, another official, seizing and indeed, as I mentioned before, starting to stall our semis and our trucks in the name, as you know, and I know, of fighting climate change. Everything is justified in fighting climate change. But the thing about corruption is that it tends to not only leak out, but arrogantly and flagrantly flaunt its intention and its strategy. The troubles levied against the trucking industry are no different. They're not different, right? At the nose of the semi, you have the bureaucrat, they crush. And at the taillights of the trailer, the bureaucrats crush. And on the east side of the cab, and on the west side of the cab, the bureaucrats crush. And so they crush the whole vehicle, and therefore the whole industry, with the truck driver inside with laws and rules and regulations and strict invasive standards and untenable laws. So, for an example, in the first place, hopeful operators, as you know, must take the plunge into the stratospheric cost of actually acquiring their Class 1. And I know this is a barrier to entry into the market because if I, who got my Class 1 to haul grain before this new law came into effect, was forced to pay $10,000 for my license, I wouldn't have got my license. New and expanded and extensive Class 1 training, also known as the Mandatory Entry Level Training, or MELT program, was introduced for Class 1 licensure in response to the tragedy of the Humboldt bus crash. And no one here, no one anywhere, denies that the Humboldt bus crash was one of the most heartbreaking tragedies that stilled the clatter and the traffic of 21st century life and forced us to reflect on the many blessings that all of us are able to enjoy and are privileged to enjoy. But now you have a licensing system. Now you have a process of licensure for a Class 1 that, while it is perhaps not impossible, it's desperately out of reach and competitively difficult for all of these drivers to obtain their Class 1. Here you have individuals raised on a farm. Here we are in Wainwright with farmers and ladies and gentlemen in our midst who all of your lives have operated classes of machinery more complex, more complicated, and more cumbersome than most individuals will ever consider, let alone actually operate in their entire lifetime. And you already take your job and the safety of others very, very seriously. And yet, if you want to haul canola, if you want to hook up a set of Super Bs and back up to some bins and load up canola into those Super Bs and then haul them through the hills, and you turn north on Highway 17 to haul that canola to the crusher in Lloydminster at 8 a.m., you must first endure 100 hours at least of training and pay $10,000 to do so in order to legally drive, which is inefficient and in the vast majority of situations, in my opinion, is nothing more than a cash cow. Now, of course, such statements are not met without resistance. Right? The Class 1 licensure system is unjustified and inefficient, I say, and in reply, we hear the Class 1 licensure apparatus is desperately needed in order to keep people safe. Now, we hear that in reply, that's true, but what we do not hear, and what you do not hear, and what I do not hear, and what we do not see is proof of such claim. So the $10,000 training, right, was introduced in the early months of 2019 in Alberta. And this is, of course, standard or becoming standard across the country as well. It's not just in Alberta that this is a program, but it was introduced in Alberta in 2019 in the early months of the year. But in fact, there were more fatal injuries, not less, involving truck tractors in 2019, which is the latest data available because everything else is slow, than there were in 2018 and 2016 and 2015. And there were more injuries, not less, regarding accidents or with accidents in Alberta involving truck tractors than there were, for example, in 2016. Now, I do not actually think it's inappropriate to assume that the data is borderline impossible to accurately procure. I've given you a few statistics, but that is not to say that those are indicative of whether or not the program itself is workable, whether or not it's successful. Instead, I'm saying to you, I think it's almost impossible to tell. I mean that insofar as there are an overwhelming, as you know, number of contributing factors that account for truck tractor or semi or Super B accidents in the province. So perhaps this year we have 2 more fatalities in accidents involving tractor trailers or semis than we did last year. But perhaps we have another month of snow. Perhaps one night the highways were icier than they have ever been, and it's a miracle that there are only 2 more deaths instead of 15. Maybe one day there's a dust storm. Maybe one day there's a tornado, and it rings semis around and it hits another car. Who knows? Maybe a bus pulls out into a lane that it's not supposed to one day. All of these factors have to be taken into account when you look at the actual data and when you realize just how much noise there actually is when you study the data. I believe you come to the conclusion that it's borderline impossible to isolate the program, the driver training program itself, and determine whether or not it's efficient, determine whether or not it's successful. Now, I understand that an argument from silence is not necessarily, it's not an argument, not necessarily. An argument from silence is not an argument, but it's an argument from silence on the other side as well. They are saying we need to impose this, but they prove no data to show that it's successful. Now, do not misunderstand us, right? To clarify for our friends in the media that are so generous, we are not saying at APP that the province should abolish driver training, not at all. We are simply saying that the current system, the one-size-fits-all system, the system that treats everyone as exactly the same and unchanging and as one massive organism instead of individuals and human beings who have different talents and abilities and skills, is inefficient. And it creates, as I mentioned, unnecessary barriers to entry and often harms the prospective driver and society more than it helps them. Secondly, our trucking industry is being crushed, again, as you know, by carbon taxes and excess taxation. Suppose a truck driver travels 200,000 kilometers per year. And suppose, for ease of arithmetic, that driver is loaded most of the time. Say he's pulling something heavy. So that means, I suppose, that he burns about, on average, I don't know, 1 liter of fuel for every 2 kilometers-ish? 6 miles to the gallon, whatever it is. So when you do the math, you think as hard as you can. My dad was a math teacher, and he'd be just mortified at me thinking about this simple equation up front here. That means the truck driver has to fill up 100,000 liters of fuel every year. That's what he consumes. Now, we have a carbon tax on that 100,000 liters of diesel. And that carbon tax at present is 11 cents per liter. By 2030, it's going to be 40 cents per liter. But nonetheless, at 11 cents per liter, that means the truck driver must pay an extra $11,000 of what we call deadweight loss. I would call it deadweight loss. It's excess taxation every year. But it's disingenuous and it's incorrect to say that he therefore must pay an extra $11,000 and that's it. That's not true. That's scrutinizing the data from an accounting perspective, which is correct in most situations, but there is a different situation here. You must ask yourself, what could the truck driver have done with that $11,000? Perhaps the truck driver could have paid for his daughter's education in school. Perhaps that truck driver could have put that $11,000 towards a new porch in his house. Perhaps he could have invested it and retired a year or two early and spent more time with his grandchildren. Perhaps he could have repaired his truck easier and it wouldn't have had to have sat for so long. Perhaps he could have done all of these things that instead he cannot do because it's been delegated, that $11,000, to government in the name of fighting climate change. Of course, it doesn't fight climate change, but nonetheless. And if you're concerned about the 40 cent per liter carbon tax in 2030, which of course would be $40,000 per year, instead of the $11,000 that it is now for a truck driver, you needn't be concerned because thanks to our government, no one will be driving because no one will be able to afford to drive. And if this fertilizer ban comes into effect, there'll be nothing to haul. These are only two of the ways that the government is crushing or is going to crush our trucking industry, and there are many more, as you know, but time fails us. So we must present or provide the solution. Government is, or if government is, which it is, killing the industry is not dying a natural death. It's one thing for an industry, like the horse and the carriage, to die a natural death in preparation for the automobile. But the private trucking industry is not dying a natural death. Instead, it's being suffocated by assailants located in the eastern Ottawa. But who stays in the same house as an assailant? Who turns on the lights and sits at the coffee table or at the dinner table and pours cups of coffee to see if they can't work out something with the assailant to make the agreement more stomachable for both parties? I, like you, have tried to remedy this situation in Canada. I, like you, have tried to make things work in Confederation. I have heard the arguments. I have listened to the promises of politicians. I have watched men and women come into the legislature, all of them snarling like lions and whimpering like puppies after they leave, outmaneuvered by the federal government and the leverage that they possess over us. I have presented all of these problems to you for your consideration and warning. My youth was passed in this province, under the direction of Klein, enjoyed by a period of prosperity, true, but now I am, like you, clutching on a precipice and sliding into a dark and fearful abyss where government is omnipresent and everyone else is alone. I therefore conclude, after hearing the arguments already presented to us today by Dr. Modry, that independence is the vehicle to guarantee Alberta's prosperity. We have tried everything else. We have negotiated in the best of faith. Independence is our only option. In the first place, in an independent Alberta, we are proposing government decentralize and seriously reduce its size and its scope. That includes licensure. We are instead proposing a merit-based system of policies and of governance in order that, for example, the man who knows how to drive isn't forced to fork over the same amount of money as the man who doesn't know how to drive. Again, we want this merit-based system, not a one-size-fits-all system. If an individual can drive, then he should not be forced, required, or any of those things to empty out his life savings at such a young age in order to pay for his Class 1. All people in all professions, in every profession, should be assessed equally on the grounds of merit and competence and skill and nothing else. We We also need independence. We live in a world where it isn't like that anymore. It's different. No longer are you assessed based on qualities that you can control, but qualities which you can't control, nonetheless. We also need independence in order to totally defeat and destroy the carbon tax and all other invasive taxes, and pass legislation that ensures such taxes will never, ever, ever be enacted in our province of Alberta ever again. Now, as Dr. Modry has just mentioned, that the Supreme Court of Canada has already ruled in Canada that the carbon tax is constitutional. In an independent Alberta, it would be ruled in Alberta that the carbon tax is entirely unconstitutional, saving truck drivers and consumers literally thousands of dollars every year. Only when independent will we be able to defeat this hydra and protect Alberta from it ever being enacted again. This movement grows, and it continues to grow. Federal domination, or their attempted domination, of our nation is at an end as we grow tired of their trying to submerge us in a way of life that we cannot and will not accept. And when we are successful, when we have that referendum on independence, and when we enjoy independence ourselves itself, then our truckers shall be protected from economic desolation, then our children shall be shielded from the poverty of socialism, and then our province, a public beacon for the rest of the world to see this resolute defiance against the destruction of our industry, shall stand in the world as a nation that upholds its industry, as a nation that's grateful for its workers, and as a nation that enables its truck drivers and its transport crews to work and provide for their families, as all good men and women desire to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanner. Ladies and gentlemen, Tanner Hnidey. Okay, so we're going to have one more presentation, then we'll have a quick break, and we'll come back with some more good stuff. Our next guest was born and raised on a mixed farm east of Ponoka. As the youngest of three and the only girl in the family, she spent most of her days trying to keep up with the boys. She developed a love for running the tractor in front of any implement, the spring calving season and the long, endless summer nights of the prairies. After college, she moved to Saskatchewan just to see if the roads were really as bad as everyone said. They were, but she remained a resident of Saskatchewan for the next 10 years anyways. She worked in the transportation industry for several years before moving to Lloydminster. Knowing Alberta was where her heart had always been, she jumped at the chance to return. She worked in the oil field until 2014, experiencing firsthand the boom-bust reality that is the energy sector. With the economy in a slump, prospects for a career looked slim. However, it was during this slump that she was introduced to financial concepts that set her path on becoming a financial educator. Fast forward 6 years to find her helping individuals and families chart their paths forward towards financial freedom, starting with the most important aspect, education. Ladies and gentlemen, please join in giving a warm welcome to Britt Pasiechnik.
Well done. Do you want me to move this? Nope, that's fine, thank you. I told her she could just say it was pronounced Smith and nobody would know any different. When I got married, I went from being a Bloomquist, and that was a name that I had to quite often spell for people. And I thought, when I get married, I'm going to marry somebody with a really easy last name. And then I married a Pasiechnik. So it took me actually quite a while to learn how to say that. So Tanner always delivers such an amazing message. And I come up and I think, well, what am I going to do to kind of wow the crowd? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go the cheap way and I'm going to tell a joke. 3 religious leaders of the community, a priest, a rabbi, and an evangelical preacher, are sitting around talking about how they run their finances. The priest says, at the end of the week, I make a line on the floor, then I take all the money out of the donation box and I throw it in the air, and whatever lands on the left side of the line is for God and the church. and what lands on the right is for me. The rabbi says, I do something similar. At the end of the week, I draw a big circle on the floor. I throw the donation money into the air, and whatever lands in the circle is for God in the temple, and whatever else lands outside is for me. The evangelical preacher perks up with his thick southern drawl. I do something similar too. At the end of the week, I throw all the donation money in the air. Whatever God catches, he keeps. Not bad, not bad, not my best, but not bad. So listening to Tanner speak, and yes, I did come from a transportation background, it gets me fired up. When I listen to Dr. Modry and Tanner, I think, man, we have to do something. We have to do something now. So there's some things that kind of startle me, and every time I get up to speak, I think, what can I talk about that impacts people? Because, man, the financial world is full of misinformation, of people being taken advantage of, and having an insider look into that has, oh my gosh, led me down so many rabbit holes. But some disturbing things I'm going to talk about tonight is, number one, on June 30th of this year, there was a new consumer protection rule put into place. There were several of them, but I'm going to concentrate on ones that make the most impact. And so you may be asking, well, what would we need in 2022 that hasn't already been put in place for nearly half a century? Well, it'll be likely to be these far-reaching laws, right? Ones that are highly improbable situations that wouldn't impact everyday Canadians. And maybe it's better to be safe than sorry when it comes to protecting people's money. So maybe these rules and laws are necessary. But you'll be alarmed to learn that that's not the case. The new consumer protections address the most preposterous banking practice. And I'm glad you're all sitting down for this. And those of you in the back who aren't, you may want to. Banks selling products and services that benefit their bottom line over the client well-being. That's right. The banks were taking advantage of us. They're taking our money on deposit, which then they loan out or they make money in other ways. And then they were selling us products that weren't appropriate. And this may have happened to some of you in this crowd tonight. Whistleblowers revealed that banks were upselling. Okay, they were essentially selling consumers things that they know they didn't need and weren't appropriate for them. But don't worry, because now in 2022, that is now prohibited. Banks can only sell you services and products that are appropriate for you. This new rule had been in the making for 10 years. 10 years. So it took the government 10 years to mandate ethics. What's worse, that they had to mandate it, or that when they realized that they had to protect consumers, that it took them over 10 years to make happen? A lot happens in 10 years. People graduate high school, they graduate college, they buy a house, they have a family in a 10-year period. Right? Others complete their secondary education and now face an adult life with adult decisions in front of them. Some might become grandparents and retire in a 10-year period. Some transition their farming operations to the next generation. People build a career or a business. So which 10-year period of your life would you choose to be a target to the banks? When would bad advice hurt you the least? And when would predatory practices be acceptable to you? But surely there was somebody watching the banks, right? There had to have been somebody watching out for us. Well, yes, banks are required to have internal systems for dealing with things like complaints, but they're also required to be a member of two government-approved watchdogs. But, because we're talking about the government here, did you know that a number of deficiencies in complaint handling, procedures, and operations have been found within the banks and their watchdogs? Issues such as unreasonable delays, inadequate training. Inadequate training. Oh, it's just your money, you guys. What does it matter, right? And a system that allows banks to choose their own watchdog. Two reports by the Financial Consumer Agency of Canada in February of 2020 stated that bank employees working on the branch or in call centers may be, and I quote, under pressure to make sales and control costs. That same report also noted that banks do not make it easy for consumers to escalate complaints. Canada has 30 million banking customers. And it is estimated that every year, 5 million, more than 5 million customers lodge at least one complaint within a bank. If every one of 6 of my customers or my clients complained about me, I'd be out of business and likely in jail. How would your business survive? And just how long should we have to wait for a complaint to be dealt with? Again, we're talking financial matters. We're talking matters that count the most for you. 5 business days? 10 business days? Maybe you want to be ultra generous and give them a month of business days and give them 20. Well, previous to these new rules in June this year, banks were expected to deal with our complaints within 90 days. That is 3 months. But now they're required to make sure that our complaints are dealt with in 56 days, just shy of 2 months. Much improvement, right? I have my securities licenses, and my investment dealer, like all securities registrants across Canada, except of course Quebec, pause for the groan, is required to utilize the Ombudsman for banking services and investments for any complaints involving securities. They're a not-for-profit organization that is designed to resolve and reduce disputes between consumers and financial services firms. But now imagine that for a second, I could veer away from that system. And instead, maybe I'd pay a different organization to handle the complaints that are lodged against me. And perhaps they would charge me an hourly rate. And perhaps the less complaints I have, the less I pay in administration costs, which, by the way, rise exponentially with the more complaints I receive. Do you think I might be inclined to hire this watchdog instead? And then discourage my clients from lodging a complaint? And I might make it a bit tougher for them to do so. And what if my hired watchdog made it more difficult for consumer complaints to be escalated? I think you're seeing the picture that I'm painting here. But what if, say, 3 of our 6 banks, our 6 big banks here in Canada, did just that? 3 of them hiring their own watchdog to do as they want. Would that be concerning to you? If they can hire their own watchdog, how can you guarantee impartiality? You just can't. But don't worry, we're hopefully to see an end to this because announced in the 2022 federal budget, the government's intending to introduce measures to strengthen the complaints handling system and put in place a single nonprofit external complaints body. But again, more legislation required to protect consumers, and how long is this going to take to put into law? Banks will also be required to create a whistleblowing program for their employees, so otherwise unreported problems can now be exposed without repercussion to the employee. Well, what kind of unreported things are happening if now we're aware that they're selling us services and products that are harmful to us? They're not taking our complaints seriously. What else could there be? We probably don't even want to know. An article in the Financial Post states that Canadian Banking Association says that banks devote considerable time, effort, and resources to help ensure customers are provided products and services that are appropriate for them and which they have consented to receive. Yet if that were true, then why do we need a law in place to stop them from selling us inappropriate things? And why only now are they required to provide separate agreements for each product and services so customers actually understand what they're buying, how much it will totally cost in the end, and how to cancel an agreement? These institutions rely heavily on us not reading fine print and not speaking their language. We do have consumers advocates out there. They are part of the reason that we've seen these new law changes. But they've even admitted that this is just scratching the surface, that what has come into play does not go far enough. They're out there to protect us. They're fighting to protect us as consumers. So Alberta's prosperity must not be squandered, and it must certainly not be stolen. We're all sick and tired of watching our hard-earned dollars being taxed so that governments can do just that. We're outraged that we're being played for fools. But right behind that public enemy number 1 is public enemy number 2. So let me ask you something. Let's say we're all 20 again, okay? And for some of us, that's not too long ago, and for other people, it's a ways ago. But where were you at 20? Were you raising a family? Were you out figuring out life? Were you starting a business? Were you going to school? Let's pretend for a second that you knew that you had to prepare for your future, because I think everybody here would admit that retirement and getting older happens quite quickly. One day you're 20, the next moment you're facing retirement. So let's say that you invested $10,000 to save for your future retirement. And let's say, I'm going to split you guys into a group of 3. Let's say you over here on my right, you guys are instructed or advised to seek out an investment that is safe and secure and guaranteed to grow. Okay? And then over on this side of the room, you're advised to put your money into a balanced fund. And right here in the middle, you guys were advised to put your money more directly into the markets. Now, fast forward 48 years and you're facing retirement. You've had your family, you've had your career. Now it's time to pull the pin and start enjoying everything that you've worked for. Let's check on your investment that you started 48 years ago, shall we? You here with the safe, secure, guaranteed to grow product, you've averaged a 3% rate of return. You over here who were advised to have a balanced fund, you've averaged a 6% rate of return. And these lucky few in the middle here, you were advised to go into the markets and invest directly with companies. And you have now averaged a 12% rate of return. So let's start with our 6%ers. Your $10,000 investment 48 years ago has grown to $160,000. You over here on my right that got 3%, your $10,000 has grown to $40,000. How long is that going to last you in retirement? And now my group of people here, and this works out really well because this is the smallest group of people, and this is the smallest group of people that normally does do well because they get different advice. The money that you would earn on that $10,000 at a 12% rate of return over 48 years is $2,560,000. That is a big difference, right? That is a major difference. That is the power of compound interest. Einstein described it as the 8th wonder of the world. He who understands it earns it, and he who doesn't pays it. You've all invested the same amount of money over the same amount of time. The difference was the advice. Banks often advise using accounts and investments that don't stand a chance against inflation and taxation. It's despicable. So where do you find someone to trust, someone that's going to give you the right information? You can't just take someone's word for it unless you know that they're always working in your best interest. And there are a few basic rules to money that make up the roadmap to financial freedom and independence, and a guarantee that you will never fall victim to those who would make money off of you. What if these rules taught you how to get out of debt faster, like decades faster? Would those whom loan you money and make money off the interest you pay be incentivized to show you and teach you that rule? That's why the best advice I can give is to become educated in personal finance. I promise it's not as hard as it's often portrayed. But a little bit of knowledge will be the difference between overpaying in interest, insurance, and taxes, and being sold products and services that you don't need, and instead being able to keep your hard-earned money for yourself. Find yourself an independent financial professional who knows the rules to money, applies them, and is actively teaching others about them. We do exist. We do exist. There's a growing network of us who concentrate on education-based financial planning. Don't settle for anything less. And as I was sitting there and just kind of thinking about what I was going to finish up saying here today, I realized that part of my research into the big banks, and part of the reason I have a big disdain for them is 2 of them are named partners on the WEF website. I'm not going to name the banks. You can ask me afterwards if you want, or look up the information yourself. And an Alberta-born and bred financial institution is actively working with the federal government on digital ID as of February of this year. These are things that should be highly concerning to us. We have to stop allowing financial institutions to do to us what we're mad at the government for doing to us, which is using our money the way that they see fit and treating us like we don't have a choice. And unless we start a financial revolution in our own lives, in our own homes, in our own communities to take back our power and demand fairness and respect, we are doomed to repeat the same mistake over and over again. And believe me, they're banking on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Britt. let's just take about a 10-minute break here, grab a drink and that kind of stuff, and we'll get set up for the Q&A. You guys can share this mic if you like. Ladies and gentlemen, can you please take your seats? We're going to get started.
Oh, why is that?
Well, because there's only one, and you usually talk more than I do.
And I practiced this last name all the way here, past section. And then I got up here and I couldn't see it.
No, I just
Past section, yeah. Because I called Kurt first.
okay.
All right. I'm going to count to 3, and you better get back in your seats. You're going to miss the next recess, and that is going home to your parents. I've never done that, ever. Never had to. My students were always good with that. Okay.
That's an interesting question.
Okay, question number 1. How would the Canada Pension Plan be reclaimed from the federal government if we separate?
Actually, that's a very easy question. If any one of you were receiving a pension and you moved to France, you'd still get your pension. So Alberta, as an independent nation, you would still get your pension. But one of the advantages of Alberta independence is that we would have our own pension plan. And very likely in the negotiations with Ottawa, whatever component of the pension plan resides with the federal government would be transferred to the provincial government. And even if it wasn't, the massive wealth that we generate here in this province anyhow would more than replace it. But I don't think we have to worry about that at all because, like I said, it doesn't matter where you live in the world. If you're an expatriate living in some other country, you're still going to get your Canada pension. So I don't think you have to worry about that. It's just that I think by virtue of taking control of it, which we can do legally, it's within the Constitution, and that's one of the things that the next government should do, is take control of that, and then you'll have that $3 billion added to your pension plan right away. Anything you want to add to that?
Not particularly, but just that Dr. Modry is quite correct. We have 700,000 seniors in the province. The average payout per month for CPP is about $600 some, which means it's about $420 million every month, which is $5 billion a year. And we're already paying much more than that into CPP. And as such, we have the sufficient funds required, because it is a pay-as-you-go system, to sustain our own Alberta pension. But you could refine it, and you could make it much better than it is at present. And with regards to receiving your pension after separating, that's also quite correct. You would have to negotiate a tax treaty, depending on what the government decided to do with regards to passports and citizenship and so on. But to be totally honest, I see absolutely no downside to right now, today, starting up our own Alberta pension plan.
How likely and how long would independence take? Right.
Well, that's a good question, and I alluded to it earlier. So the safest and fastest and legal pathway out is in the 2 years, 18 to 24 months subsequent to the 2023 election, you take control of that which you can within the Constitution. You try and negotiate at the same time of the other things that you want to have control of, particularly federal taxation, and ending equalization, et cetera. And at that 2-year period, the two key things are to have set up your own police force, because we don't want to be controlled by a Crown police force, the RCMP. And second, we have to have our own provincial tax collection system in place. Once you've got those two things in place, you can have your referendum on independence. So it can happen as early, that referendum can happen as early as 2024 to 2025. And then when successful, it triggers the negotiations. And just like England did, they put a timeline on Brexit. We do the same thing. For example, we could say that with that successful referendum, we have equal power now to the federal government, negotiating power. And we can say that we're putting a 6 to 12 month timeline on negotiations. We've already figured out what we want, and this is what we want, so let's discuss it and get it over with. If we get what we want, fine. If not, we're out. So that's how quickly it can happen. And why it's important is because you have to keep in mind this sense of urgency. We need to not cross the Rubicon into the abyss of the Great Reset. So this is quite important to get done sooner rather than later. Now, at the same time that you're doing those things in those first 2 years, you're also negotiating, you're setting the stage to negotiate with the US and certain other countries in the world. So you got trade issues resolved. And in terms of having those countries support your independence. And the most important country, of course, would be the US, because once we have legitimacy from the US, then we'll have international legitimacy.
Please comment on the Alberta Sovereignty Act as to whether it is credible or similar to what Alberta Prosperity Project proposes.
There's much to like about the Alberta Sovereignty Act, but there are some deficiencies. So what's to like about the Alberta Sovereignty Act, for example, is the notion that those advocating for the Free Alberta strategy are for the first time demonstrating a spine that they will stand up to Ottawa. So the Alberta Sovereignty Act contemplates not enforcing certain federal laws that abridge that abridge provincial constitutional authority. Now, there are certain things that the government can do legally and within the Constitution, such as, like I said, policing, pensions, immigration, employment insurance, and provincial tax collection. But if it is to not enforce for example, the Canada Health Act, or it's not to enforce carbon tax, or it's not to enforce the restrictions on fertilizer, or anything else that is deemed to be breaking federal law or not following federal mandates. The problem is that the federal government knows how to respond to these things, and they will respond by withholding federal transfers. That's the key thing. That's the problem, is we give them the gold, and then they control us by only giving back what they are willing to give back to us. And if we're not compliant, doesn't this sound like the Great Reset? If we're not compliant, they don't give us our money back. So that's the weakness of the Free Alberta strategy. But the Free Alberta strategy will accelerate the taking control of that which it can within the Constitution. But when it tries to take control of those things that really, really matter, that's where there's going to be the pushback. And that's why you're seeing, certain columnists and some of the MLA or some of the leadership candidates for the UCP slamming the Free Alberta strategy. But I've talked to Rob Anderson, who's a lawyer, who is one of the co-authors, as well as Derek Fromm, who's a constitutional lawyer, and Barry Cooper, who's been a long time, he's an academic at the University of Calgary, and he's been probably a separatist from the day that he was born. So, the other component, if you look at that Free Alberta strategy, here's one thing that I really like about it, is that they've fundamentally said that they want to create chaos to open the Constitution. And if they can't open the Constitution and change it, they have within the Free Alberta strategy in multiple places, then the only option is Alberta independence.
Dr. Modry, did you hear back from Ron Vallant after you addressed his misinformation?
I didn't, well, Ron, yeah, you know, I was actually grateful that Ron challenged us on the issue of UNDRIP. He was wrong about the issue of the lockdowns, or being landlocked, rather, excuse me, because he just cherry-picked one thing on that. But the answer to the question is, I didn't hear back directly from Ron. In fact, it reminds me that I should try and get in touch with him. I don't have his contact information, but probably if I were to send him a Facebook request or something, I could get it. But he's not a stupid person. Ron is a smart guy, and he brought to our attention the issue, the concerns regarding UNDRIP, and that caused us to have a re-look at that with respect to it being a component of our Indigenous policy. And our Indigenous policy was drafted by a constitutional lawyer who's looked after Indigenous affairs for decades, as well as a First Nations chief. But the other First Nations constitutional lawyer on our board hates UNDRIP. And so I don't know, did anybody ever see the webinar that we did with Leighton Gray and myself to address UNDRIP? Yeah. I hope we were, it came across as we were sincerely impressed by what Ron had brought to our attention, and that we made a very legitimate effort to understand the mistake that we made, and we fixed that. The point is that UNDRIP was a problem because at the end of the day, it basically perpetuated Indigenous dependence. And fundamentally, that was one of the major problems of it. There were others as well, but we addressed that in that.
Will you be trying to reach out to Indigenous territory or give land recognition at your meetings in the future?
Well, if we're going to achieve independence, we have to have First Nations and the Métis on board. Otherwise, that creates an enormous problem, particularly with respect to international recognition. And at the same time, we have to acknowledge that they were never at the table when Canada was formed. They were never at the table when Alberta or Saskatchewan were incorporated into Canada. They've been marginalized in many ways. This is an opportunity for them to be at the table in the creation of, in true partnership, in the creation of a new nation of Alberta. One of the things that's important to understand as well is if you want to get the First Nations people on board, you can't take away from them that which they already have. But what they are missing is they're missing the opportunity to be independent. Independent in the sense of creating their own wealth in very many circumstances, particularly on reservations. So treaty rights can be honored in a way in which it works for everybody.
What would the proposed currency be for an independent Alberta?
Well, if it were up to me, I would make it a gold standard. But I would not set it up as the gold standard was set up back in the, the 1910s and 20s and so on, because the problem that we're facing today is that government has control over the money supply, and government can do what they want with the money supply. The Bank of Canada at present is supposed to be separate from the government, but it's really not, right? When the government wants them to print money, the government issues a bond, tells the Bank of Canada to buy that bond. The Bank of Canada has to print money to buy that bond. It gives it to government, and then government injects it into the economy. And that's the issue. They can raise rates, they can lower rates, they can make the currency go like this, and that's a problem. I don't like that, and you don't like that, because it does not allow you to accurately predict for the future, and it does not give you the sufficient information to properly save for the future. And, for example, inflation is crushing us right now. You have seniors who all their lives scrimped and saved and worked their hardest in order to enjoy retirement. Or for that matter, you have the individual my age who has worked for 3 or 4 years or whatever it might be, trying to afford one thing that he wants today. But he realizes now that all of his money is declining in value. Not that it's his fault, but it's bureaucrats' fault. And so the magic of a gold standard, and I'll be brief here, is just that it separates, or it needs to be separate from the politician. You know what? To be totally honest, I am a proponent of whatever currency system is hardest, meaning whatever holds its value the longest and is the most stable and is most distant from the bureaucrat. That's the currency system that I want. In my opinion, that system is a gold standard, a different type of gold standard than what was introduced, in decades past, but the fact remains. And so it would take a while to set up, right? You would have to buy gold because we've sold all of it, and that makes you chuckle. And you'd have to transition in a smooth way, which we can discuss after, but it takes a while. But on the whole, that's the answer. I would desire a gold standard to be the base currency for an Alberta currency, in order that the politician would be removed from the currency process altogether, in order that you as an individual would be most able to predict what the future for the currency is going to hold, and so that you would introduce stability into prices in the market, and et cetera, et cetera.
I just add one thing. When it looks as though there's going to be a successful referendum on independence, because the polling is showing that, and the referendum date is set, you have to consider what will happen to the Canadian currency. So in this transition period, when that successful referendum occurs, the Canadian dollar will plummet. So you might want to consider at a certain point in time, as Tanner mentioned, either purchasing gold or putting your money into a different currency that will not be impacted by what happens in Canada.
Why not all 3 provinces together? Manitoba, Saskatchewan, and Alberta?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And the reality is that Alberta has to lead this process. We have an extremely homogeneous ideological culture in this province. The majority of us are conservative. Yes, there are NDP enclaves, socialist enclaves, but even many of those people, we have members of the Alberta Prosperity Project that formerly were supporters of the NDP. Why? Because they like freedom and prosperity as well. So Alberta has to lead it. Saskatchewan, like I mentioned earlier, is setting up a Saskatchewan Prosperity Project. Manitoba isn't there yet. But for example, we've been invited to speak at a Maverick function. And what do they want? They want Western Canadian separation. What did we say earlier? We would, if we are invited to speak at another organization's event about the Alberta Prosperity Project, we are going to do that to help build the membership. So there are synergies that can occur. And there's no reason why Saskatchewan, seeing what happens in Alberta, can't do what we are doing, because other regions in the country, they also are concerned about their freedoms and prosperity, but they don't have a vehicle yet to get on board. They don't have a movement going that they can get on board. So when we create that movement, it will stimulate Saskatchewan, and I think they'll be the first domino to fall, unless it's northern BC, which are even more closely aligned with us because they want an energy corridor to Kitimat or Prince Rupert. So, and Manitoba, we haven't, I'm not sure if we have any members from Manitoba yet. We do from Ontario and I think Newfoundland and BC, but I'm not sure about Manitoba. So, but that would be ideal. I mean, if you think Alberta can be a powerhouse unto its self in relation to the rest of the world, But with Saskatchewan, with its massive agricultural, uranium, potash resources, agricultural lands, etc., I mean, it would be fantastic. And Manitoba with its hydro, etc. You know, that would be wonderful to see that occur as well. But you know, we can't jump across you know, too many hurdles at the same time. We need to get Alberta organized to be able to get out of this unholy marriage with Ottawa.
Okay, the next questions here, there's 3 questions, but I'm gonna just pick one, and then whoever wrote these can come see me after, and I'll tell you what we'll do. What do you think of the current state of modern university?
The current state of the modern university. The modern university has, in my opinion, I'd be interested in Tanner because he's a little closer to having graduated, not by too many decades, but in any case, he says he didn't go to school for 17 years. Yeah, well, you know, that's funny that he says that because he's only 7 years beyond those 17 years. So you know, it's funny. But I think the universities have been inculcated by CRT. I think they've been inculcated by, you know, gender issues that are literally irrelevant to education. I think there's been a tremendous socialist influence in the universities, and it's, you know, part of the reason why it's difficult to engage with young people these days, because, you know, you think back when you were young, you knew everything, right? When you were young, and as you get a little older, you start to realize what you don't know. So it is a challenge, but we're doing our best to try and engage with them, and you know, with the younger people, and you know, most of them are on social media, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, you name it, Twitter, etc. And so we've got a tremendous presence there now, and that is a challenge. But remember, what we're doing is not a short-term project. This is a project that is going to take 3 or 4 years or longer. And you know, once we're independent, we'll transition to something different from an educational perspective. But Tanner, why don't you respond to the university question? Because I think you've seen some of the problems that are occurring in the universities these days and colleges.
To answer, I would say that the state of the universities at present is very bad. And the areas of university that are the worst at present are the arts, because the arts have been already invaded and conquered by the ideologues, by these radical ideologues. The sciences are next. And the problem is that the sciences, the mathematics and the chemists, et cetera, do not excel in the art of politics and the art of ideology. They're concerned about facts and what's real and what's true. And so when those ideologues, those radicals migrate, as they're migrating now into the sciences, it won't be much of a battle, in my opinion, at all. The conquest will be, it'll be swift, it'll be quick, and it'll be all-encompassing. From what I can tell, when I was at university, and I must admit, economics, at the U of C, I was shielded from the majority of that infiltration, from the majority of that indoctrination, the brainwashing. The economics was still, at least when I was there, was still shielded from all of that. There was still some sensible form of thought, in my opinion. But from what I could tell, taking electives and so on, at the heart, what's happened to the universities is that they've completely disregarded the foundation of law and facts and truths that are self-evident. There are certain self-evident truths, we've discussed them and have enshrined them in our proposed policies and governance and so on. And you know this to be true, and I know this to be true. There are certain self-evident truths that do not need to be justified. They are true because they are. And the whole of society rests on that foundation. What you have in the university at present, in my opinion, is an attempt. It seems successful, but it's not, because they're sawing off the branch that they're sitting on. But you have an attempt to completely wipe out that foundation. You go to the university, you go to these liberal art classes, and their whole purpose is to see through everything. They want to see through this and they want to see through that. And you say something and they go, I see through you. But the problem is they're actually seeing through the self-evident truths. They're actually seeing through the foundations. And so it's good that the window is transparent because you can see the garden through it. But what happens if the garden were transparent too? You see, if you see through things long enough, you see through everything. And if you see through everything, it's the same thing as being blind. It's the same thing as not to see. And so what's happening to the universities is that they're divulging actually into, believe it or not, the realm of the insane. The reason I say so is because, not because they're irrational, but because they're super rational. They rationalize everything. You can present to them the most extreme of situations that would make man revile and say, this is wrong, this isn't right. But the universities or the individuals in the university will rationalize it, and they will compose some maze and connect all of these dots to some way, somehow make everything work. And so they see the smallest portion of reality and they think they're seeing the whole picture, but they're not, because they're imprisoned in this very small, even though it's large, university. And all around them are people who think exactly like they do. And they have this small group and they think that they can see the world exactly as it is. But then when you expand your view and you come to a place like Wainwright, you realize that people actually are hurting, and that people, who do drive truck are paying extra costs and tax, and it's a heavy burden. And if only those individuals could widen their scope and broaden their scope, they might actually see what the world is actually like and actually ingest some sort of reality. So the news is bad, but I'm excited. I think it's going to get better.
That was a great comment, actually, amusing as well, I have to say to you, Tanner. But here we are right now, and talk about reality. We're now at, I think it's 37 different genders. Now look around. How many genders do you see? How many do you believe in? But this is exactly what Tanner's talking about. They're looking at a tree, and people have married a tree. I mean, how crazy is that? Well, this is the kind of stupidity that's occurring in society. And it has, as you've said, it has gone freaking insane.
Yes, it has.
I try not to swear.
Are you thinking of becoming the 51st state? No, the states are as bad, if not worse off than we are.
Well, yeah, no, we have no intention of becoming, it's not part of our platform to become the 51st state. Let's look at it realistically. We posed the question earlier, how many people want to stay in Canada, but with a better deal? How many people want to leave? Now, we didn't pose the question about Alberta 51, but the majority of the province, I believe, still wants Alberta to remain in Confederation, but with a better deal. If you poll those people about Alberta 51, that's another step. I mean, it's one step to go from Alberta within Confederation to Alberta as a sovereign nation. It's a pretty much bigger step for most people, and it won't be accepted, in my opinion, at this time, to jump over Alberta independence and go to Alberta 51. At some point in the future, if that's the will of the people, a decade down the line, so be it. But right now, I think the analogy is we'd be going from, that's it. I was leaping into the fire already, and I forgot about the frying pan. Yeah, we'd be going in from the frying pan into the fire, I think. So I don't think Alberta 51's the smart tactic. And by the way, when we were talking with Josh about Alberta 51 on a webinar the other day, he told me what the strategy was, what their plan was, and it was to have an individual or a group of individuals come forward with a petition to shop to the various provincial MLAs so that they would take it to the legislature and hold a vote on Alberta joining the United States. So you can think about how realistic that plan is.
The UCP leadership candidates are saying that threatening separation will result in corporations leaving Alberta. They cite Quebec as an example of this. What are your thoughts?
That's a great question. I love that question. To begin with, where does business locate to? It generally will locate to the regions of the world that have the most favorable regulatory and tax environment. And that's what Alberta would be. That's number one. We would probably lose some, but we would gain a lot more. Think about what has happened already because of federal government overreach. You probably don't know that we had some $270 billion of planned investment into Alberta during in the past 15 years or so, and it all dried up. Why? Because business left. So thousands and thousands of businesses have already left. What we want to do is create an environment to bring them back. Insofar as Quebec is concerned, you're absolutely right. There were businesses that left Quebec, but what isn't said by certain individuals is why they left. It wasn't economic issues in terms of the ability to run their business. It was cultural and language issues. Many of those businesses that left were Anglo-based businesses. Their legal documents, the culture, the communications were all in English. And that Quebec secessionist movement was designed in a way in which those businesses would be forced to change their culture and their languages. And that's why they left. So it's kind of a false narrative to suggest that businesses would leave Alberta. Some might leave, and that's fine. But realistically, like I said, the lowest taxed and best regulatory environment will be a magnet for business to come here.
With the Alberta Republic, would they ban chemtrails over Alberta? Apparently, we're.
I think so. I think that probably would be the case. I would be in favor of that personally, but you know something? It's not something that we actually put in our policy document because A, we didn't think of it, but now that we've thought of it because somebody just raised it. Actually, a while ago, about a month ago, I was talking to somebody about this, but I didn't think to get it in our policy document. But that would probably be something that would be opposed. But remember, we can only advocate, or I'm not going to use the term advocate. That's wrong. We can only educate people to the problems of using chemtrail in the atmosphere, and so it'll be up to the government to make that decision. But when we've got 500,000 or 1 million or 1.5 million members, they will want to be responsive to what we want because of the whole issue of recall and how we will be able to influence the government. And that's why what we're doing is so different than has ever been done before.
Why do they not use the notwithstanding clause, or is that only for Quebec?
No, the notwithstanding clause was actually used in Ontario, for example, when the Premier used the notwithstanding clause to restructure City Council, I believe it was. And so it can be used anywhere in the country, but it's restricted to certain legal matters. It can't be used for everything, unfortunately. And I'm not, although I've read the Constitution a couple of times, it is rather boring to read. I can't, to be honest with you, I can't tell you all of the areas of jurisdiction that could be influenced by the notwithstanding clause. But in my opinion, it should be applied to everything, along with eliminating Section 1 of the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, which was used to abridge your individual freedoms and rights by imposing the COVID mandates on everybody. And that clause should be eliminated. When Brian Peckford signed the Charter of Rights and Freedoms, he intended, and the co-authors intended, that that clause only be used in the event of war, not in the event of a fake pandemic.
Let's have a hand for our questions, or the answers to all of our questions. Thank you, Dennis and Tanner. I'll give these guys a second to get down from here, and I'll introduce our next speaker. But first, I'll tell you the events that we have coming up here. So on Friday, the Alberta Prosperity Project Solutions for a New Alberta is going to be in Rimbey. On Saturday, we're in Rocky Mountain House. On the 18th, there is a pierogi supper hosted by the Vegreville chapter in Mundare. That's on the 18th. On the 20th, we are back to the Whistle Stop Cafe. And then there's the forum is on the 25th, and tickets for that one are on our website. And if you have any questions, you can always send them to contact@albertaprosperity.com, and we are diligent in getting answers back to that. Okay, our next guest. Our next guest is a well-known, courageous defender of rights and freedoms, a folk hero, if you will. I've heard him speak on many occasions, and I can honestly say that when he gets onto this stage and a hold of this mic, the energy that he brings will make you want to be part of the history that we're trying to create. He has put on so many miles, not just in Alberta, but elsewhere as well. He is a household name, and his popularity grows. He once said, sometimes to do the right thing, one has to stand up and be alone. But when you do the right thing, you're only alone for a moment. He advocates for truth. He advocates for kindness. He advocates for understanding for those who have a different perspective. And I can tell you firsthand that the burgers that he makes are second to none. Ladies and gentlemen, from the Whistle Stop Cafe at Mirror, Alberta, Mr. Chris Scott.
Sorry, that was a longer walk than I thought. Well, good evening, everybody. How are you tonight? Thank you for coming out on a, what is it, today the first day of the weekend? Wednesday, right? First day of the weekend? Thanks for coming out to support the Alberta Prosperity Project and listen to what everybody has to say. I'm sure Dennis already did this, but how many people are not members right now in APP? Oh, there's a few, okay. So, for those of you who are members, why are you here tonight? Just shout it out. Whatever first comes to your mind. It's a very good reason to be here. What else? There's got to be more than that. Is it the snacks? Because I come for the snacks. Information. That's the one I've been thinking about. So, Shannon just mentioned a couple things. The first one makes me feel weird, the folk hero thing. Every time I hear that, I'm like, I'm not a folk hero. I literally pour coffee and feed people hamburgers. But I guess they're that good. So, information. How many people in this room feel like we're in information overload right now? Am I the only one, really? Because every time I go on social media or I get a phone call or an email, it's somebody else telling me that I have to do this so that I can be prosperous or free in the future. Every day I get emails from UCP leadership contestants, from political parties, from different freedom organizations and groups. Everybody wants me to do something. Everybody wants to share their information on how they're going to fix things for us. Now, some of them, it's easy to see through it. You make enough burgers and you can spot a nothing burger from a mile away. And I find that a lot of the things that are being thrown at us right now, they're big old nothing burgers. It might look good, like that, the McDonald's ads where they got the beautiful Big Mac and everything's perfect. But when you look a little further and you look into it, it's not even a burger. It's art. It's not beef. It's not glistening with nice juices off the hamburger. It's sprayed water on there, and they use plastic for the cheese, and they make it look very appealing. But it's a nothing burger. You eat that, and you're not going to be satisfied. You're surely not going to be free. Your bowels for sure won't move free because it's mostly plastic. So I find that a lot of the things that are being thrown at us right now they look great, they sound great, but the minute you take the time to look just a little bit further into it, you're left wondering, what is this? Why am I even paying attention to this? Now, information is the 100% most important thing in our lives right now, because if we don't have the information, how can we make an informed decision come election time, right? So as I ponder the information that's getting thrown at me, and I watch what's going on around me, has anybody seen that movie where the dog's trying to do something, and every time he sees a squirrel, and it's up, I think, right? He gets distracted and he goes off on another track, and then eventually comes back, gets on the right track. That's where people are at right now. When we first started this, this whole thing, when I first started this whole thing in January of 21 or whatever, we all had a goal, something tangible that we wanted to see happen, and that was end the restrictions. How many people participated in a end the restrictions movement or rally or campaign or anything back then? A few people. But things have changed. The restrictions are gone. And a lot of the problems that we were facing when we started paying attention to what's going on and looking for solutions, those problems aren't apparent anymore, are they? The only problem we have right now is which golf course are we going to go to? Or is there a camping spot available where we want to go camping this summer? So it's very easy to be distracted. It's very easy to lose focus to the fact that if we don't do something here, we're going to pay the price later. 20 years ago, we had an opportunity to do something, to get involved, and we chose not to. We chose to focus on our jobs, go on vacations. We didn't support people who were standing up for the right thing. We just went along our merry way, hoping that somebody would fix things for us 20 years ago. And the culmination of that, thank you to COVID, was realizing that while we weren't paying attention, while we were letting the information just go right over our heads, things are being put in place that allowed the government to come and put a chain on the door of your business because you just want to be open. Things are being put in place that allowed the government to tell you that you couldn't go to a restaurant unless you took a shot, like a dog going to a kennel. Things are being put in place that allowed the government to tell you you cannot have anyone in your home for Christmas. Or you can't go see your 97-year-old grandmother in the nursing home. She'll have to die alone. And this isn't the politician's fault, any more than it's a dog's fault for peeing on the carpet. A dog will be a dog. A politician will be a politician. They'll do politician things. Government, if left unchecked, will do government things, which is grab more and more power and take more and more of our lives and our money and our freedoms until something snaps. It was our fault that this happened. It wasn't the government's fault. It wasn't the politicians' fault. It was ours. Because they are our servants, and we allowed them to make a mess in our house. Now, what blows my mind is that there are politicians that literally did a big old number 2 on the front doormat of our house, and they're telling us that we have to support them because they're going to fix the problems that they created in the first place. We have politicians that have been part of the establishment, part of this structure for decades. And they're telling us, oh, you know, freedom. Yeah, we believe in freedom. We're going to make sure you're free. We're not going to lock you down again. Just support us and send us money. The same people that did it in the first place. Some of these folks that are asking for our support right now, they were there when this stuff was put in place. As a matter of fact, some of them voted it through in the legislature. Did you know that? And you might be asking yourself, well, how could they do that to us? Where were we? Comfortable, working a rig job, making a couple $100,000 a year, buying a new truck every 2 years. That's where I was. Certainly not paying attention to what the government was doing, because my bank account was always full, my belly was full, I had beer in the fridge, and I could go to Vegas twice a year. Well, how things have changed. And there is some hope in this kind of dreary, dark message I'm giving you tonight. And the hope is that people like me and people like you are now starting to pay attention, and we're waking up, and we're pissed. And we don't want to see this again. And now we're paying attention when we see politicians tell us they're going to do something for us. How many people get emails from the UCP leadership contestants? How many people are actually truly satisfied with what they're seeing? I'm not either. They always fall short. If one of them would say, as a matter of fact, any politician, it doesn't have to be in any party. If Rachel Notley said this, I would celebrate it. If they said, we are going to look over all of our legislation, all of these policies we put forth, we're going to look at what these organizations that are supposed to benefit Albertans, let's talk about AHS, why not? We're going to look at all of this stuff. We're going to find out where the disconnect is. We're going to find out, we're going to make sure that everything that's going on in this province is constitutional. No gray area. We're going to make sure your rights and freedoms are actually paramount. We're going to legislate it, that we can't do this again. We're going to have reviews of all of these government-funded organizations that are to our benefit. I think that should happen anyways. But none of them do. They tell you, freedom, and we're against lockdowns. They fall short. Now, there are some people who want to become politicians who do not fall short. They're principled. They have strong moral compasses. They're very passionate about what they're doing. But most of them are involved in very small political organizations. So what do? Do we sacrifice or set aside our principles and support what we think is going to be the winner and hope that the people we support do what they say they're going to do? Or do we stand on our principles, demand better from those who want to be our leaders and our government, and support even the little guys who are doing it right? The second option is kind of scary, right? It's always scary to be the underdog. I know that from the last 2.5 years. As a matter of fact, I'm still the underdog. I'm fighting an organization that has millions of dollars that they could just squish me with. I was offered a deal where I could set aside my principles and pay a modest fine and just agree that I broke the rules and get on with my life. Well, I told them to stuff it because my principles are not for sale. They're not. And by no means am I saying I am perfect. I am a flawed human being, just like everybody else who's ever walked the earth save one man. I'm not perfect. I have been bad at times. I'm a poor role model for children. But I believe that each one of us should be allowed to make our own decisions about our lives. I believe that government shouldn't have their dirty, sticky fingers in our lives at all. I believe that anything that the government supports, any companies, organizations, whatever, should be accountable to us. That's what I believe. And I'm going to support those who hold those values. Now, you're probably sitting there wondering, well, how does this tie in with Alberta independence? Our federal government in this country is not going to do any of those things. They're not going to do things based on principle and ethics and because it's the right thing to do. They're going to do what they think is going to get them magical credits on the global stage. They're going to do what the polls suggest will get them reelected, as do a lot of our provincial politicians, by the way. Our federal government is never going to stand on principle and acknowledge your rights and your rights and your rights. They're not going to do that. They don't want you to have rights. And they're starting to slip up and tell you that. Do you recall hearing a very prominent federal politician tell you that your right to property is not absolute? Do you remember any conversations around our carbon tax challenge that told us we don't have certain rights because climate change? Do you recall the federal government saying, no, you don't have the right to access your money anymore because you supported these truckers? Or how about you don't have the right to be treated equally in the so-called justice system because you spoke against the government? We allow murderers and rapists and people who steal millions of dollars from senior citizens. We allow them out on bail the day after they're in court. Yet you speak out against the government and you sit in jail until the voices around get so loud that they have to let you out. Did you know there's still men sitting in jail from the Coots demonstration? They haven't had a trial. They haven't faced their accusers in court. The Crown hasn't presented any evidence to suggest that they actually did what they say they're going to do, and yet they're still in jail. And how corrupt is our government and our politicians? They don't even talk about it. And the question is not whether they're innocent or guilty. That's for the courts to decide. The question is, why are they still in jail when other people who haven't had their day in court are back out on the streets? Some of them back out to come back to your farmyard and steal your quad again. None of these people who want to be your leaders, your politicians, your government are talking about this. None of them are standing up for justice, for individual rights and freedoms. I don't even think they know the names of those men who are still in jail. I'm ashamed that I don't either. I know one name, Chris, because it's my name. I'm going to go visit him next week. This is where we're at in this province. This is what we've allowed while we were enjoying our comfortable lives. And I don't say that so we should all feel ashamed, although I do. I feel ashamed that I didn't do my civic duty and make sure that I was having my voice heard. I'm hopeful. Because every time I go to one of these Alberta Prosperity Project events, or similar events across Alberta, I see faces of people who really want to make a difference. I see faces of people who probably 2 or 3 years ago wouldn't have come to something like this, wouldn't have told their neighbors about a political or an educational movement designed to help them embrace their rights and freedoms. I see people committed to making changes, which is a good thing because there's a lot of empty seats here. And I hear Wainwright is a tough crowd. But that's the hope. With Albertans like you actually doing something to take control of their own futures, we can and we will make a difference here. Don't let the empty chairs discourage you. Look at those empty chairs as an opportunity. You folks there, I bet you have 4 friends who would love to join you for some snacks. There's 4 seats beside you. You, sir, all by yourself there. I'm sure you have 5 friends who would love to join you. I didn't have anyone that wanted to join me tonight. Kind of embarrassed about that. But that's what this is. These seats, every single one of them, is an opportunity to increase our own voices. We bring one person. We bring 2 people. They bring 2 people. And eventually, we're an orchestra of voices demanding better from our government. Demanding that our government acknowledge that there are serious problems with the entire system. This isn't about my restaurant. It's not about the energy industry. It's not about agriculture. This is about a system that has been twisted to a place where it no longer serves us. The slaves, I should say the servants, are becoming the masters. And they don't just want you to be their servants, they want you to be their slaves. If you don't believe the following statement, the people who want you to be submissive, they do not see you as anything but cattle. You are useless eaters. That's it. You are net contributors to global warming. That's it. If you don't believe that, you can find verbiage just like that. They have said these things. And if you still don't believe it, why don't you go check out what's written in Agenda 2030 and beyond? There's almost 8 billion people on the planet. And you useless eaters need to be reduced to 1.5 billion. So what happens to 6.5 billion people? And we wonder why the things that are pushed our way aren't good for us. Healthcare is about pills and drugs. It's not about healthy choices. Never was. The response to COVID was never about your health. It was about protecting the healthcare system. We need to change this. Because if we don't, imagine the struggles that our children are going to face when the government comes for them and they can't do what I did. I use social media, probably one of the most powerful tools and dangerous ones on the planet. And I rallied the support of an entire province and then an entire country and then all over the globe. I rallied support for my cause. My kids won't be able to do that. Pretty soon, I probably won't be able to do that either. I think we have an internet censorship bill already in the works. So we have a lot of work to do. And I found the most effective way to reach people. It isn't up here yammering and ranting on to a room full of people. It's in my everyday life having individual interactions with people. That's power. Share your stories, share your concerns, gently let people know there's a problem, and build relationships. That's how we do this. It's not about speaking to a crowd of 50,000 people, although that would be fun and terrifying. Before this, I never spoke in front of a crowd of more than 10 people. Don't actually really particularly like being around people, but how the world changes. So, I hope that the first part of my message didn't discourage you. I really want you to focus on the fact that those empty chairs, each one of them is an opportunity for you to make a difference. And if we all do that, there's a lot of time between now and May of next year. And we can and we will make a difference. Thank you.
Chris Scott, everybody. Remember at the beginning, I talked about Eli Wiesel, one person of integrity can make a difference. It really does start with one person. One voice turns into 2, and then 4, and so on and so on. And we're asking all of you to join us in making that difference. Those who we thought were people of integrity have shown us that they are not. Gone is our trust in all levels of government. What we thought to be our God-given rights and those guaranteed by the Constitution and the Charter of Rights and Freedoms have been trampled. They've been tarnished and they've been tossed by the wayside. We've been misled. We've been betrayed by those we trusted to be our voice. They've demonstrated that not a single one of them had the courage to speak out, to speak the truth, or be the lone voice of the people. They've shown that their only concerns were for themselves and their positions and their incomes. The time for change has arrived. We must seize the opportunity that we have right now. We must overcome what we've been through in the last 2 years or more and rebuild vibrant and strong, healthy communities. Our guests have provided us solutions for a new Alberta. You've heard them here today. We've been sweeping across this province. We really have. I don't know the number of shows that we've been at, but we're up to 8,200 members in 5 short months, but we need more. Thousands of people have heard our message, and we intend to share it with thousands more. We have a strong foundation, and together we can build that independent, sovereign nation of Alberta, one that will be the envy of every other nation in the world. We've got one chance to secure a future for our children and our grandchildren, and that's by electing an independent-minded government in 2023. Your legacies depend on that. My legacy depends on that. We've got good people at our table, but we need more. We need people with vision. We need people with energy. We need you to buy memberships because that's how we keep rolling across this province. Buy a hat or a t-shirt. We didn't have any here today, but buy one. Use it as a conversation piece. Have a conversation about what the Alberta Prosperity Project is doing. We need you to sign the petition. We need you to become volunteers and chapter leaders and have events just like this one, but at the next one have more Nanaimo bars. That would be great. We need you to take the seeds of change and hope that you've heard today, and we need you to grow them in your communities. Our community is growing. We need to grow it to be 500,000 to 1 million people or more. And that's something that has never, ever been done before. Dennis said that. And mark my words, the entire world is watching to see what Alberta is going to do. And I'm challenging you, be on the right side of history. Be part of that history. Alberta is our ultimate community, one where we feel connected and responsible, one where everybody has a crucial role. Every one of you does. We must become bigger than we've ever been, more courageous, larger in life and greater in spirit. And Alberta will become a sovereign constitutional republic, one where the First Nations will sit at the table in the creation of a new Alberta, one where no one is left behind, one where it will be the best place to live, work, start a business, or raise a family. It will be the envy of every other nation in the world. And when we do that, Alberta truly will become united, strong, and free. Thanks for coming. Safe drive.